Before we start this podcast, I want to definitely remind you of a sponsor for Fresh of the Word, 20 by 20 Apparel. Founded in 2015, 20 by 20 Apparel brings original tributes to pro wrestling's classic arenas, moments, and events. They look to spotlight the bloopers, bleeps, and body slams along with the biggest, smallest, strangest, and strongest. In the world of wrestling where there's hundreds of shirts, promotions, flyers, social media accounts, and ads, don't get lost in the sea of parody shirts and display fonts. They can provide professional graphic design services at a reasonable price. 20 by 20 also hand screen prints all the tees in-house. So if you'd like to discuss a possible run of tees, posters, koozies, foam fingers, or even Zubaz, then drop them a line at 20by20apparel.com. That's the number 20x, the number 20apparel.com. And also check out their enamel pin line. It's super cool.
Fresh is the word.
Welcome to the Fresh is the Word podcast. I'm your host, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier. And like always, we talk about the freshest of topics and we have the freshest of guests for you. First off, Fresh is the Word has some new intro music, courtesy of the good brother Steve-O. Check out more of his music at iamsteveo.bandcamp.com. And that's spelled EYEAMSTEVEO.bandcamp.com. Shout out to Bang Belushi, Knox Money, and Foul Mouth for the previous intro, which the full song will be on a forthcoming Bang Belushi album. My guest today is Certified Sex Educator, Elle Chase, a suggestion from previous guest, Anne Hodder-Shipp. Happy birthday, Anne. And we got into the importance of sex education and how to normalize it, along with body positivity and so much more. It was a great chat, and Elle Chase continually spreads information about sex-positive education and, most recently, resources for accountability and actions for Black lives. And that's the topic I want to get into before we get into my interview with Elle Chase. There's a lot of information going on in the wake of the killing of George Floyd about how to fight the rampant racism that has become woven in the fabric of America. I want to focus on how white people can be a better ally during this racial awakening. As a white person myself, I've long been aware that Black culture has been an important part of my life, and I always try to learn more about how I carry myself within it all. Now I know there's a lot of information out there, and I'm going to link some resources in the show notes for this episode at freshthepodcast.com. But I want to touch on a few things real quick. Before anything, it's not enough to think you're not racist. You must be anti-racist also. That means speaking up against racist acts, whether it's coming from your friends, your family members, or even businesses you support. You have to be vigilant about being anti-racist. It isn't just enough to think you're not racist. Also, if you want to be a part of this Black Lives Matter movement as an ally, this is a lifelong practice. This isn't something that is just trendy right now, because all lives will not matter until Black Lives Matter. And in the long run, pinpointing this movement towards the brutality of Black people in America and hell everywhere will make things better for everyone. But it's also important for white people to know that really being an ally means doing the work. There's been so many bad instances recently of performative allyship. Like kneeling while wearing a kente cloth, or white people washing Black people's feet, renouncing their white privilege. And there's even Instagram influence. I can't even believe this. I can't even say this. It's so stupid. There's even Instagram influencers donning blackface in solidarity. Please do not do any of this. Tell your white friends not to do any of this. You don't do it. Black people are not asking for any of these performative acts. What Black people are asking for is police reform. They want laws. They want real change. they don't need any illusions of activism. There, once becomes a time when these protests die down, are you still going to be fighting for this racism? Are you going to still be anti-racism? That's that's an important thing to think about. That's what's important now, and it's your job as white people during this time, during this important time in society and culture, is to put in the work and learn what you need to do and listen to the experiences of black people. A lot of white people want to filter what they think through their own experiences, but white people have totally different experiences in this country than what black people do. It's not, that's not even up for argument. But like I said, I'll have links in the show notes for this episode at freshofthepodcast.com to understand this movement much better, understanding the realities of black people and how you can be a better ally. And one more thing before we get out of here, please Google what defunding the police means. It doesn't mean we want to get rid of the police altogether. It just means we want to move around resources, make new laws, change things around, change budgets around so that the right people are heading up the correct problems that we have in society. Because a lot of times that's left up to the law enforcement and they're trying to deal with, mental health issues, be a social worker, be all sorts of things, and we leave it all up to cops to doing, and they have no training in any of that, so they confront it the same way that they're confronting, criminal acts, and even the way they confront criminal acts a lot of times is too much. Law enforcement has become way too militarized for way too long, and we need to spread out the resources. But I do feel that these protests feel different than anything else that I know maybe we've felt in our lives. And I feel like there could be some real change that happens. But like any other movement, civil rights movement that's happened, we have to keep going. It isn't just a weekend thing or a week thing or 2 weeks thing. This is a lifelong practice that more of us need to, bring into our daily lives, just like any other practice of humanity. So please, join the movement. All right. Now, after a word from our sponsor, let's get into my interview with Elle Chase. All right, welcome back to the Fresh is the Word podcast. And like always, we have the freshest of guests for you. And for this episode, my guest here is Elle Chase. She is a certified sexuality educator, pleasure advocate, body acceptance advocate, writer, coach, consultant, and she's always fun to bring out. She always brings out this information in a very frank and fun way, and that's why I wanted her on the podcast. Thank you for joining us, Elle.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you were a suggestion from my previous guest, Anne Hodder-Shipp, but I'd already been following you, probably because she mentioned you so many times in posts of hers, and I always enjoyed following you on Instagram, and so it's cool to have you on the show. What I like about you is that, and this is something that someone like Anne, there's other people that I really, really like about you guys, is that you present all this information about sex education and about women's bodies and all this stuff, but you do it in a frank way and at times a very humorous way. It's very digestible. It isn't like you're not making it sound like it's a taboo. We can have these conversations just like any other topic, like whether it's, we talk about, boobs in the same manner as talking about getting your oil changed or something.
Yeah. Yes. I know more about boobs than an oil change. So.
Right. So yeah, thanks for being on the show. Look, what's the importance of normalizing these conversations and having those conversations in such a normal, humorous way?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's normalizing it. Often when you speak to people, even in passing or bringing up something that is completely natural and organic about, you can, if they don't say something like, "Ooh, that's squicky," or yeah, or they sort of reframe it in more of a cagey way. It is because of that sort of taboo around sex and pleasure and wanting it and or not wanting it. And it's something that we don't think of because it has been classically for male identified and female identified people in different ways. For instance, uh, male sort of sow their oats and women are sluts. It can be, we don't really use the term male slut. We use womanizer or something along those lines, which has its own connotation.
Yeah.
So, pardon me. So yeah, I think that being able to just speak about it and speak about our body parts like you would speak about an elbow or a foot, or I have a stomach ache, or I'm really hungry, makes it much easier for people to correlate our sexuality as a normal part of being a human being.
Yeah, that's something that I've tried to practice recently, even with my friends, and that's something that I've noticed too is that I've been able to really kind of change my friend circle to be able to have those conversations with my friends in just a
Yeah.
normal way, being like, "Hey, I did this, whatever, blah blah," and
Yeah.
they're really accepting of it too, to where they talk about it in the same manner, and I
Yeah.
feel like it's a lot easier to get off your own anxieties about it too, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times just talking about it might help resolve the issue.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you'd be surprised, talking about it freely with people that you trust will normalize it for you and for them. Who knows, you may have the same feelings or same similar feelings that might spark a conversation that leads to something else that you want to explore that you never thought of in that way. So it's really encouraged. So I'm glad that you're doing that.
So, how did you like first get into this field? What really sort of motivated you to want to learn about sexuality, sexual education, just the body in general, and really kind of spread the word about it?
I didn't grow up really sort of connected with my body. I grew up sort of feeling neuter. I'm a straight woman. I'm a femme, and I never sort of regarded myself that way growing up. I didn't attach myself to any sort of sexuality as I was growing, and so I never really learned about or discovered my sexual desires, leading me to be in a sexless marriage. I'm skipping over a huge chunk to spare you the boredom, but um, I was in a sexless marriage for all intents and purposes, and passionless. And I realized one day after watching an episode of True Blood on HBO um, that I had never experienced passion.
Yeah, it's
And
crazy where like where like that motivation, where that like sort of moment of where it locks into your mind come from. Yours can be
yeah,
like True Blood. Mine, I've had like instances where I'm just like, oh, it makes sense now, and it just would
yeah,
be the weirdest of places.
yeah. It's strange because I was in this huge depression, and a friend told me to watch True Blood. It was running at the time, and I got sort of obsessed with it because it's just like a gothic soap opera. It's
Yeah.
a fun show, and there was a point where the two main characters finally consummate their attraction and love, and it just sort of popped in my brain. I was able to really sort of vicariously experience what they were experiencing, and that's when it all sort of burst forward from my psyche, and I just had this, this satori, as Kerouac would say, this awakening, I suppose, and from then on, I became really, really feeling my sexuality. So one thing led to another. I left my marriage, and I had this online relationship with somebody, and with a man, and we would send pictures back and forth, like porn, about stuff we wanted to do with each other. It was all new to me, and he was sort of leading me, like, is this interesting, is this interesting to you? And we discovered the Tumblr platform, RIP Tumblr, when you were able to share adult themed
Right.
pictures. And I started a Tumblr called LadyCheeky.
Right.
And
how did all that feel when you were doing that with this person?
It was so liberating and exciting, and not just sexually exciting, but like but intellectually exciting. And I was discovering this whole new part of myself. Like, it almost felt like if I was born without the ability to know when I was hungry or not. And then suddenly I could tell when I was hungry. I was like, oh my God, where has this been all my life?
Yeah,
now I know when to eat.
Yeah.
So that was really, really enlightening. And there was a whole world I had no idea about. And I was in my mid-30s. And I was about 40. And oh, how time flies. And I started getting, people found this site, and they started emailing me with questions, and I'm like, I don't know, I run a fucking porn site, I have no idea. And so I started looking up answers and wanting to give them accurate answers, and I just sort of fell in love with the genre of sexuality and of teaching sexuality, because I had had such a mind-blowing and life-changing experience learning about my own. So that's how I got into it. Long story.
I've noticed definitely recently with especially with the discussions changing, the types of discussions that are being made between people, that when, and this is probably true for you, is that when a woman runs a site like LadyCheeky, or just does something like is a photographer and is like doing, and just shooting naked women, and they're and having fun. Are you familiar with someone named what's her? Why am I blanking on her name?
It's okay. Erica Lust?
No. Let me see here. Why? Ellen Stagg. Are you familiar with Ellen Stagg?
I love Ellen Stagg.
Yeah. I had her on the podcast. I bought her last book. I contributed to her Patreon, because there's a whole other dynamic when I look at her photography in regards to shooting naked ladies. In regards to there's some other ones that I checked out, and I just didn't feel the same thing, because it was coming from men. What's from your experience, what's that difference, when you're curating these platforms coming from a woman, as opposed to just the classical way of like men, creating
male
these
gaze.
platforms.
Yeah.
In the male gaze, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's interesting, because I didn't start out thinking about that. I just posted what turned me on. And what turned
that's natural.
me on.
That's
it's
something,
natural.
That's something natural. Yeah.
It's natural. It was natural for me, and what turned me on at the time, and still is a predominant theme in my life, is raw passion, raw desire. And that can be hardcore porn. Everyone has moods, but also something that showed authentic passion and desire and sexual desire, as it were. And so I think that being exposed to such a long sort of generation of male gaze type pornography, and there's nothing wrong with that,
Right.
But it is very heavily focused toward penis and vagina sex and what a penis wants, what a male identified person finds sexy, and that is often not physically accurate.
Yeah, because there's times when, like, I'll see photography done by a man, and the pose of the woman will be very weird and unnatural, where there's like the vagina is coming out in this weird angle.
Well, it's cheated in a way so that you can see the penetration, and that's the male gaze.
And it's not even with penetration. It can just be like a solo naked woman, and you're seeing the vagina in a weird angle, and I'm like, this ain't sexy. But then, like, I can see something like what Ellen Stagg will do, and it's just women being playful and fun, and I'm like, this is sexy. This is fun. Like, like you can be turned on by it, but then also just appreciate it as art, and
absolutely.
And that's what I like about a lot of things that come from the from a woman. Filming or shooting these sort of things, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be something to turn you on or have masturbate to if you want to. Right. It could be something that you can just enjoy as like that it looks good. It just looks good like any sort of other piece of art.
Exactly, and it will turn you on in certain ways that maybe other forms of art may turn you on in an inspirational way to create your own art, or in an intellectual way of, wow, look at how they did this. But I think that because we've had such a proliferation of the male gaze in porn, it has colored the idea of what sex actually should look like for both men and women.
Yeah.
And so that has created a culture of mechanical, very myopic types of sex, where there is, just look now, like when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, it was just normal to see a bush on a woman. Yeah. And a man, to be honest.
Yeah.
Was just complete, and that was like, there was no concept at that time that there was any sort of shaving or removal of hair. And now if you see someone with a bush, it's like, oh my God, she's messy, or she obviously doesn't care about her male partner, or that's because of that sort of mind state right now, a bush on a woman is hella sexy for me. Yeah.
I see that bush, and next thing I know, I'm like, oh, dude, come on. Oh, give me that bush.
And it's so interesting, too, because, again, when Craigslist, when you were allowed to post personals and answer personals, rip Craigslist personals, I was all over that thing, hooking up. And I would find that heterosexual men looking for women mostly would be, instead of like, do you want to see my dick, or do you want this, or what's your body look like, would be like, do you shave? And I initially took that to mean like, well, fuck you, right? Fuck you. I don't have a 14-year-old's, vulva. I'm sorry. But actually, and no one should say that anyway. Let me just preface it by saying no one should be asking you if you shave. But what I found was that the heterosexual male population of Los Angeles, at least, was like, I like a bush. And I found that very interesting, because if you had asked me on the street, I would say, no, predominantly men right now want a shaved pussy. And that just wasn't accurate. So to go back to your first question, when it's normalized to talk about these things, it is, you usually get more of a of a cross section of what is out there and what is not, if that makes sense.
Oh no, yeah. Is there? Did you find that is there a reason why some men like a shaved pussy and some like a bush, or is it just a preference?
Well, I'm sure there are many reasons, but in my personal experience, what I have found is that to not shave is to be dirty.
What?
To not shave means that you smell more. Means you can't. I had somebody that I dated for a while who would, well, not that long, but would say, I can't breathe. Like, well, gosh, it's really hard to breathe when you have a hard dick down your throat. So, but you don't see me saying I can't breathe.
Dicks are big, are ugly, and
yeah,
there's a lot of things you got to deal with down there.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. They're external. They're right there.
Right. You got this shrivelly sack underneath that you got to deal with. Like,
I mean, you can look at any body part that way, really. You know what I mean?
But dicks are not a pretty looking thing for the most part. Every once in a while, you might get an erection and look down there and be like, you know what? That erection kind of looks pretty. I don't know how, nice. but for the most part, dicks are kind of an ugly thing. They're.
Well, I am partial to them, so I have to say that that I don't find them particularly ugly. But
okay, all right.
I see what you're saying. But
maybe I just don't like my own dick.
Well, also you may not be attracted to dicks, so that might not be your thing.
I'm a little. I came out as queer like last fall, but I still prefer women. But every once in a while I'm like, yo, that dude looks kind of fly, man.
Yeah, I do the same thing where I'm like, I am predominantly heterosexual, and it will be once in a blue moon where I'm not, and I can look at a woman and just go, wow, like I'm a tit person, and I'll look at someone's tits and I'll be like, oh my god, those are
like, I'm not attracted. It's that I'm not attracted to dicks, but it's just that I know a dick is not the most like pretty looking thing,
Yeah. Well, it's not the prettiest part of the body.
Right. There's like a vagina for the most part is usually pretty, a nice ass.
Well, a lot of women would actually argue with you. Hence the vulva reconstruction industry.
I know that there is vaginas that like you look at it and be like, yo, what the hell happened down there, man? Looks like roast beef.
So different.
It looks like roast beef or some shit like that, and you're like, okay, what happened down there? Blah blah blah. But no, for the most part, you're if you were to look at vaginas just randomly, they're a pretty looking thing, Whereas dicks, kind of weird, the skin tone is usually different than the rest of the body. Has that weird sack underneath, has that top, depending on if you're circumcised or not.
Right.
There's veins. There's a lot of shit going on.
There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, and it all has to work together, and you're like, fuck, man, like, come on, and shit.
I have to say, just to be the devil's advocate here, or the alternative viewpoint, is as someone who really enjoys a penis, when it's something that I used to be afraid of them, like in earlier life, I was afraid, and they were very imposing and seemed almost violent, even though I've never, you know what I mean? And
there's a lot of reasons why you would think that, have, there's a rape culture out there.
Absolutely.
There's
and
like
as women,
just penises are penises. We already talked about what they look like, but then there's so many things that are like anti-penis.
Well, and also like there is something to be said for people with penises, men, male identified, whatever, who are not used to being penetrated to try anal sex, because then they really tend to go, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
There's something that goes inside my body.
Yeah.
And that can be, under the wrong circumstance, a very violating feeling.
Yeah.
Or it can be a very cohesive, co-creative really enjoyable, intimate experience with my partner, and such vastly different connotations for that.
Yeah,
You know?
and with men, like when they think about like if like a penis was gonna go, in their asshole,
Mm-hmm.
they think of it that they're being forced to do it. It's gonna be
Right.
like, it's gonna be a rape like
Yeah, or it's a
situation,
gay thing
a gay thing. It's gonna
with
be
air
something that
quotes.
is
Yeah,
very violent, in
yeah,
their mind.
yeah.
So they really don't, think when in actuality there's a lot of nerve endings out there. There can be a
Oh
lot of
yeah,
pleasure,
yeah.
that a man
And
could.
to be fair too, like the anal sex culture that is out there, is also, the enjoyment of it is dependent too on your body's makeup, because it depends also on how close those nerves are to the outside of your skin, or the outside of,
Yeah, yeah,
so it's like what might be enjoyable. I know women who they can really only come through anal sex.
yeah.
And I know women who are like, no, I don't understand it. It does nothing for me.
Yeah,
And I think
all
it has a lot
vaginas are different, all assholes are different.
exactly,
It's just like
exactly.
when it comes to all that, there's no like black and white of it. It's
Right,
all
exactly.
there's such a variety. There's such a gray area when it comes to that. That you'd be like, I don't know what you mean by that.
Yeah, exactly,
So.
exactly. No, you got it. You put the nail on the head.
But that was a lot we just talked about.
Yeah.
We just went from one. We just went all everywhere and everything. But when what was the sort of like, okay, when you were kind of exploring your own sexuality,
Hmm.
you know where what was the sort of moment when you realized that you wanted to start spreading the word to other people about this?
Um, it was pretty immediate, because it was such a huge, joyful discovery. I likened it. This is very weird, but I likened it to becoming a born again Christian.
I
How born again Christians are just like, you will be saved, join Jesus.
Or you got
And
like a really good Christmas gift and you want to show your friends.
well, yeah,
You're
I
like,
mean,
oh
I think
my
it's
god.
all of that. It's all of that. So I was just telling all my friends, and I was trying to come up with, analogies, and I was diving into books and porn and trying everything sexually and talking to people.
How
And
did you sort of deal with it though, being coming like at a an older time in your life?
Mhm.
How did you sort of deal with like, I'm sure you had a little bit of internal like embarrassment or shame that kind of naturally came with it.
you know, I think for me, what happened was I was so starved for um that part of my life to begin, or I was so excited for that part of my life, but I was also very starved of any sort of sexual desire
Yeah.
and any sort of sexual enjoyment. Like, I had never understood what's the big deal about sex. It's not that exciting. And then when I found out how exciting it could be, I was like, oh my god. So my age didn't come into play, but my body image did for a while. And so it was revolutionary what it did to change the way I perceived my body, not completely, but in a way that was workable for me to still feel sexy, if that makes sense.
What did you feel about your body image when you came to this revelation, and what was sort of like the evolution of that?
Uh, I did not like my body. I did not feel sexy. I was not in my body. I didn't feel like a woman. I felt neuter. And as I became more interested in sexual pleasure and started to flirt, not even like have this lover,
Yeah.
I started flirting on Twitter, on like Twitter After Dark. You know what I mean? And it was a big deal, because on Twitter, they don't know what you look like.
Yeah.
So I could really explore that sexy side of me, and discover that it's there, and what effect it had on the people that were open to it. So when I
Yeah.
started to actually date, my what I felt about my body and how it was, if it was desirous or not, was secondary to going out and getting some, basically. So
At the time when you were dating, were you getting the reaction from these people when you finally saw
yeah,
them in real life, that they were
yeah.
like, "Oh, I'm accepting of your body."
Absolutely. And in fact, I have never dated more in my entire life than I did when I was heavier. And what I found, and this is what my first lover after I left my husband described to me, this is how he described it, was he could be presented with two different women, one woman that weighed 300 pounds and one woman who was like a supermodel.
Yeah,
They're both equally beautiful. Their bodies are just different. And pardon me. And he would go for the 300-pound woman every time, depending on who had a better sense of her own sexuality. He said that it
exactly.
was not, he did not find conventionally beautiful women attractive solely because they were conventionally beautiful. What he found attractive was someone's sense of their own sexuality, what makes them feel sexy.
Yeah, because
And
a lot of
so,
times, like
yeah.
those things go off to other parts of their personality, to
Mm-hmm.
where they're really, you can talk to them about a lot of things. They have a sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
They're more of a complete woman. Whereas the person who doesn't have a sense of their sexuality, they might actually be kind of boring.
It can be. I
Yeah.
mean, I think what he was talking about was that to be intimate with somebody who is not attached to their own sexuality is rote, is mechanics.
Yeah, it's
And
boring.
to, yeah, and to be with someone who is accepting of their entire sexual self is more interesting
Yeah,
and
because you
more
can.
exciting.
Yeah, you can tell him what to do during sex. You can have
Yeah.
communication because you know it. You have a better idea of what you want, and being like, you can tell it to him in a way to where he's not gonna feel like emasculated.
Well, you're more open to it. And to be honest, you don't have to be fat to hate your body.
Oh, of course, yeah,
So, yeah. So, in fact, I know many women who are models that hate their body more than women who are fat. And I know tons of fat women who love their bodies.
yeah.
And to be honest, I lost weight because of a medical situation um, a couple of years ago. And before that, I was 250 pounds, and now I'm 150. And I felt better about my body at 250 than I do at 150. So it has nothing to do with size. It has everything to do with how you perceive your size and its place in the world,
How do you
if
feel
that makes
about your
sense.
body right now, though?
I'm coming to terms with my body right now. Losing that amount of weight at a later age in life does a lot to your body.
Yeah.
It does. You have hanging skin that will never get firm, and it makes the shape of your body different than what you would think a body looks like. So getting naked when I was fat was fine for me at one point because eventually, because I was a fat person. People know what a fat person looks like.
Yeah, and all the curves were looking like
All
what
the curves are
curves.
in the right places as far as I was concerned. And,
Yeah, all the curves are in the right places, looking
yeah,
like what curves should be looking like.
right. And now I look completely different, and not in any way the way someone perceiving me on the street would look like. So the first time I got naked in this new body was very difficult. And luckily, I was with someone who I adored and who adored me, and who, again, looked at me like my ex lover looked at me. Um, and so I'm coming to terms with it, and I'm not shy about it. It doesn't get in the way of, I don't let it get in the way of any sort of sexual encounter. But it is definitely marked the difference I feel about my body now than my body then. And I find that fascinating, you know.
What did you have to sort of say to yourself, like these days to sort of deprogram yourself to say, hey, you know, I'm okay with how I look now?
Well, I have lots of things. I'm writing a book on it actually, and I have lots of things to say about how to get to that point. I look at media more critically. I accept my body the way it is, even if I don't like my body. And there's a big difference there because there is a huge self-help movement out there that tells you to love your body. And I don't think, to be honest, my personal opinion is we're never going to love our bodies in
Ye-
this society.
yeah.
And so don't give that to someone, don't give that pressure to someone who it's so hard to find love for themselves. Tell them you don't have to love your body, but you do have to accept your body,
Yeah.
and accepting it the way it is. And again, that isn't something that's lifelong. There'll be times where you don't accept your body. There will be days where you don't accept your body. And then there'll be long stretches where you do. Everything isn't linear, everything isn't binary. And so to let yourself understand that it is a process as opposed to a goal.
Right. And sometimes just having somebody like you publicly talking about it, posting messages on social media will help those people look like, I can't,
Yeah.
my body ain't that bad.
Well, there's more to a person than their skin and bones, and
Yeah.
it is that our skin and bones are really such a minor part of what our attraction is. And I think the more people that stand up and say that is, I think, again, like you bringing back to that first question you had about normalizing and not stigmatizing something, because it is something all of us feel at some point in our lives at some, and it is something that we struggle with, whether it's intelligence or our body or whatever.
I've been somebody who's really struggled with sex during my whole life.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know what I was. I knew, you know, before you just had, you're gay or you're straight.
Right.
You're a man or a woman, and none of the things that went with any of that like really like connected with me. I always felt like I was in that gray area, but
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time I'm like, I'm not gay. Like I like women,
Yeah.
but I feel like there's something else there, and so I struggled with a lot of that because you didn't have the conversations about that. And the
Mm-hmm.
only thing that was close to that was like androgyny. And you had
Yes.
people like, but everybody who was androgynous were either larger than life people, like
Like
David Bowie,
extreme. Yeah.
and people who were like Bowie-esques were, detailed as freaks.
Right.
And so I was always like, I don't and all the sort of, now that in hindsight, bad advice that you get from men, from your
Oh
men
yeah, yeah,
friends and stuff like that,
yeah.
like I never, like I was like, I don't understand that, that doesn't make any sense to me. And
Well, yeah, because it didn't resonate with you, it sounds.
none of that
You know?
resonated to me. But it was like when the conversation started to occur about sexuality and gender identity, that's when I started like really resonating with what people were talking about.
Right.
So there was all these things. I wasn't having a sex drive. I didn't care. I was like, what's the big deal about sex,
Right.
when I have friends that are like, oh, I haven't got pussy in 4 days. I'm going through a
Right.
drive spell. I need to get laid, blah, blah, blah. And I'm
Yeah.
like, um, okay.
Yeah.
But,
Okay. Yeah, when you're not coming from that,
I was
that
like,
type of philosophy.
okay. Good
Yeah.
luck. but
Yeah.
in a lot of times I try to like fake it, back
Of
then
course.
I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna go, but at the same time I felt like that was a lot of the reasons why I wasn't successful at talking to women, because it
Yeah.
was very disingenuous.
Using. Yes, exactly. I mean, because it's hard enough to like put yourself out there and be vulnerable with someone that you're attracted to, and then add on top of that the societal constraints of what you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
So But I think we're coming into an age now where it has become more accepted for men to be more vulnerable, because they see that is that is accepted and more attractive to a lot of the people that they were going after.
Yeah.
There is a book, and I was trying to find the name of it, but part of my screen froze and I don't want to get disconnected from you. But it's by Jane Ward, and it's about men who have sex with men. And that is not meaning that they identify as gay.
Yeah.
They identify as straight, and yet they like to have sex with men as well. And it's such an area that is actually huge, and yet so stigmatized and so shamed, that it really it keeps people in these really tight corners. But it's a wonderful book, and I wish I could remember the title, but you can find it on any of your
I'll look for it
Yeah.
in noted in the notes for this episode. But actually, that sounds like, to me, that now that makes sense, because if someone's willing to just do that, then that means they're comfortable with themselves and they want to find other people that kind of think like them and want to be able to communicate what they want with another man.
Yes.
It's I understand that. Now I would definitely explore that.
Oh, absolutely. And this bringing up David Bowie, who is my personal hero, he was asked once early in his career if he was gay, and he paused and he smiled and he said, I have a good time. I enjoy myself. And that
Right
was in
there.
the 70s. You
That's
know what I
a-
mean? So it was a very classy way of shutting that guy up, and of also normalizing.
That's how it should be.
That's how it should be. Like, why are you even? That's a stupid question to ask.
Right.
That early on, you know.
And what in my journey, what I noticed was, once the road to what I got to today was, I got out, and I mentioned this before we started recording. I was in a very emotional, abusive relationship. I was the
Yeah.
one being abused, and I didn't even come to the terms with the word abusive with that until years later.
Mhm.
And I don't know if I've ever said this on out in publicly, and I don't care at this point. But the person that I was in that abusive relationship is also the person I lost my virginity to. And this is in the early 30s with me.
Right.
Because I had and it's not like I didn't lose my virginity before that due to lack of trying, because I definitely tried. But the other part about it, that the reason why it never happened before, is that alcohol had a huge
Yeah.
bearing on my sexuality. I instantly would get whiskey dick,
Mhm.
and that would be during that time when I was just sort of faking the funk in regards to talking with women, how I said
Yeah.
before. But then also, alcohol was the reason why I didn't have a sex drive. I didn't realize that until I quit drinking about 4 or 5 months after. And when your body starts to heal from it all and you get back to your regular feelings, I was like, yo, I'm kind of horny now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm kind of horny. So
Yeah.
I went from this. So after being in this emotionally abusive relationship, it took me a couple years to just get back on track. I quit drinking. That was the first thing. I'm 3.5 years sober at this point. And then a year after that, I started therapy. Then a year after that, I started on medication, and all of that finally got me into this clear headspace to be able to, and along with, at the same time, we were finally having good conversations about gender identity.
Yeah.
And I finally came to, and believe me, I researched all of this for maybe well over a decade. At this point, I'm probably a bit I'm very intelligent when it comes to gender identity and
Well, you're
sexuality.
intelligent, period.
Yeah.
But that's an area for you where you feel
But
good about.
I'm very well schooled in those areas at this point because I was trying to find my own answers to the point where I finally was able to find what I was. And now I identify as like non-binary or genderqueer because I feel like both my masculine side and feminine side are very prominent. And neither one of them are never not prominent,
Right.
So I just
Right.
want to be like, okay, I'm genderqueer. I'm girly sometimes. I'm totally girly sometimes.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
I came out as just, I guess I was, sexuality queer or pansexual but I still very much prefer women. I love women.
Yeah,
Women are
there might not be a name for it.
there might be not a name for
It's
like
just you.
it might not be a name for the percentage, the weight
Right.
of what I am. So like queer or pansexual gives that sort of like that variety, that gray area to be able but every once in a while I'm like I would really like to make out with a man.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I don't know how far I would want to go with a man, but maybe if I was like we talked about earlier about like men just want to have sex with men at times. It's not a homosexual thing. That would actually be something that I would be down for, because it would and still there's struggles with me figuring out what this all means and and also another thing that I never thought about until all of this was gender expression. Like how do you express yourself? How do you look? I like the way I look, A lot of times, my fashion is a mix of like 90s hip hop and skateboarding and stuff like that. I'm not going to change that for the most part. I'm not going to I like, wearing slightly baggy jeans and stuff like that. But at the same time, I'm trying to figure out how can I put in this sort of queerness of me into my look,
Right.
Well, at the same time, I'm not somebody that wants to be flamboyant, I don't
Right.
want that. That's cool. Like people can do that, but I don't want to be like have that flamboyancy to it. But at the same time, I wouldn't mind. There's I'm figuring out the struggles that women have in regards to fashion when looking for this shit. I'm like, you guys must be going crazy when it comes to this shit. Because first off, that fucking pocket thing and like,
oh yeah,
there's no pockets in or
pocket.
anything, and if there is pockets, they're like tiny ass pockets.
Yeah.
What is the problem with that?
I don't know.
Just put big pockets in things and.
Well, I'll tell you what part of the problem is that when you put pockets in something that a woman is wearing, right? It adds fabric and it adds perceived weight or perceived, bulbs where things are.
Yeah.
So often, we won't get things with pockets on our sides because it makes our hips look bigger.
Yeah.
And so people won't make that shit and then we're fucked.
Nah, like it can be done though. It can be done. But then also like, and this kind of goes, to the sort of body image thing. The way the fashion industry labels sizes is so freaking weird. Like my size, I don't feel like I'm a big person, but in a woman's size, I'm actually a plus size.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. It is absolutely ridiculous because it's a lot of vanity sizing. And I feel more comfortable in what would be considered a size 12, but I also can fit into a size 10. And and I have friends who are a 0 that sometimes fit into a 2. There is absolutely no rhyme or reason. There's only and also like sometimes a woman might need a size 14 when she's really a size 8 because it's made smaller.
Yeah.
It just makes no sense.
Oh, it's totally a mess. I'm like sitting here because every once in a while I'll see something that I like in regards to pants that are in the women's section. And because you can't find stuff like that in the men's section, but it would still look good on a man. And I'm like, and I'm looking at the sizes and everything. I'm like, yo, this is a mess. I have no
It is a
idea
mess.
if this will
Yeah.
even fit me, you know. And I was like,
Yeah.
how do women deal with this shit?
I know. I know. It's really especially now when, we're ordering things online more.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Um, so I just ordered these overalls online, and I got something that, like I said, I'm like a 10-12, so I got something for that size. And I ordered up to a 14-16. I got it. I tried it on. It was so tight on me.
So,
So it's like, it makes no sense. Most women in the United States, when measured, are generally a 14, if that gives you any sort of a idea.
right. And the thing is too, in regards to like men's fashion, all of a sudden over the past few years, there's all this thing about like slim jeans or skinny jeans and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And I don't like that. I like loose fitting jeans and stuff like that. I've always been that. And the funny thing is a lot of times I can find that stuff in the women's section where
Yeah.
they might have like cargo pants that are baggy and stuff, or like, and I'll be like, oh, let me get those, man. Like,
Yeah.
I remember trying to find a pair of white jeans for myself, and it was
Yeah.
so hard to find. I finally
Yeah.
found some pair like from Levi's that were
Yeah.
skinny, but like men's fashion is so boring to me
Yeah.
that I'm like,
Yeah.
I'll see women's stuff, and then I'm like I want that as like in more of a cut for a unisex or a man's
Yeah.
cut, and it'll be like a dress or something, and I'll be like, oh man, like
Yeah.
how can I deal with that? So that's like my gender identity sort of going through right now, is kind of wading the waters of fashion to what looks good on me and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Like I'd be the person too, and this is like totally girly side of me, where I'll see a dress and I'll be like, that looks so cute, but it's probably not gonna look good on me.
Ah, yes. I hear you on that one.
Right.
Oh God. I'm constantly going, God, that looks great. And then I get home and I put it on and I was like, wow, I look like a Lego person. Weird. It's very strange.
Another, a topic that I brought up to you before we started recording, and I
Mhm.
just kind of mentioned, was the idea of emotional abuse,
Mhm.
and from definitely from another person that you're in a relationship with. How can that sort of affect your body outlook, your sex drive and whatnot? Because a lot of times a emotional abuser will use those things as a weapon towards you.
Absolutely. And it's trauma. And especially with emotional abuse, there's usually a lot of gaslighting, that if that's not the primary form of emotional abuse, then that is something that's a comorbidity of whatever kind of emotional abuse you're going through.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of self-doubt that can come into play. I'm not a therapist or any of that, but I had an emotionally abusive relationship with a boss, and worked 60-hour weeks. So it might as well have been, you know, uh, and that was 20 years ago. And I still have bad dreams about it. So if you think about it, any kind of emotional abuse that you have will filter into all different parts of your life. And when that comes to sex, and when it comes to sex education, I think that when people are teaching sex, like other sex educators, they have to be aware and have to assume that at least half of who they're teaching have been through some sort of abuse, if not sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And really frame their lessons and their speaking in a way that is inclusive of that, because it's so prevalent. And these people are not alone and should feel like they are accepted, and that they're being made way for, to sort of shepherd them through a healing process, that is, if it is impacting their sexual enjoyment. There are books, there are therapists, there are resources, all of that. because it can manifest in so many different ways, from self-cutting to having sex when you don't really want to have sex, but consenting to it, you know, to abusing another. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Like these days, we're like in this, you know, we're in this quarantine. There's a global pandemic happening, and you see a lot of rhetoric from people, whether it's like the productivity experts or you know, anybody who's kind of like a life expert and or quote unquote expert,
self-help industry,
self-help, you know, kind of telling you
Wellness.
things that you need to be doing during this, when at the same time I feel like they're not saying that it's okay to do nothing and kind of take this time to sort of just be, or kind of catch up on your life, or like,
well, that's capitalism.
So like this all reminds me of like when I was, you know, younger, going like when growing up and then being in my 20s, that was the peak of the, you know, 10 ways to get chicks like era.
Right, of course.
So how can anybody get to the other side of like of a relationships when you're like always hearing that shit, because it was so awful.
And we're not so far off from that type of thinking, so we're still trying to muddle our way and figure out different ways to, and healthier ways to get what we want in that respect.
The douchiness of trying to like pick up chicks has turned into like the professional like entrepreneurship. It's the same thing.
Well, it's sales.
You're like, I'm like, this guy, because okay, like my therapist is a woman, and she's helped me out so much, like so much. I love her, like, but there's certain things where she's like, you know, I think it would be better if you went to see a male therapist. And I kind of fought against it for like a long time. I still haven't gone to a male therapist, but it wasn't until the last time I went to see her that I finally was like, I understand what you're talking about. But my problem was, once I was researching this, and this is why, you know, even though you're not a therapist or anything, but like this is why I like people like you or Anne or whatever, is that when I'm researching this, like the women online who are therapists, whatever, their descriptions, their sort of whole platform is very welcoming, very empathetic. The men, it felt like they were trying to sell me something. Everything was like a sale. It was like basically the how to pick up chicks, you know, thing, but for your life and like therapy. And I was just instantly turned off by them all. I'm like, it's just like they were coining themselves with like someone like, I'm sure this guy's a nice guy. I don't want to like drag him through the mud. I don't know him, but he coined himself Detroit's love guru. And
there's a problem with that on so many levels.
And I couldn't like take him serious. I'm sure he's a nice guy. I'm sure he's fine.
When anyone puts themselves on a pedestal, it totally puts the hackles up in the back of my neck, because you're basically telling people I have all the answers.
I just couldn't, man. And the ones that I did reach out to, like email, just to get more information about, you know, setting up something, it still didn't feel as easy as it did when I was contacting the women that were, you know, that I would contact before. So like my question is like, how important is it to sort of have that empathetic, welcoming tone when you're passing along all this information? And what do you feel like more men need to do in regards to this whole conversation in regards to sex education?
Well, I think when you're in the self-help industry, or you're in the helping industry, and it is an industry, which is also very important to
it's a business.
Realize. It is business. but finding someone who speaks to you, regardless of where they come from or who they are, is something that's very important. And if it's the empathetic, I think people in the helping industries are much more effective when they are empathetic, because that's what you go to them for, right? You go to them for help. And so you want someone who's going to feel your pain and help your pain. As far as men go, you know, I don't want to classify that it is a male quality, but I think the outmoded ideas of a pickup artist or a men's rights advocate or something along those lines is harmful, and certainly not the way the world is going. It's outdated, outmoded, and is not going to. And someone definitely that calls them, in my opinion, calls themselves a guru, it completely squicks me out, and I just immediately think of, I'm being sold something.
Yeah.
So I think that if people, this is also goes to religious beliefs throughout history that are trying to manipulate. It doesn't have to be a male or a female, you know, it is someone who is trying to sell you something. So I would definitely look out for that. And you can also take wonderful and valuable information. Sorry, it's garbage day here, so I'm sure you can hear the garbage.
It's not too bad.
But you can also take things that are very valuable from texts that don't resonate with you. So, for instance, I don't read the Bible, but I will hear a Bible verse every once in a while and go, wow, if you take the name Jesus out of this, it makes sense. You know, and slip in whatever you want to slip in, no pun intended. You know, I grew up, my mother was very new age. And so she would talk about healers and channelers and Reiki and all the stuff that's not Western medicine. And so I grew up with a type of understanding of that, but I don't take it all to heart. I will use it and go, oh, so that's what that modality was teaching. I can take that and I can sort of merge it with my beliefs, and then I come up with something that I can articulate that is a belief system that helps me.
Let's talk more.
That sounded really like a long way to go for a short answer.
Oh no, but that's a good segue. Like, talk more about, you know, when it comes to you being a sex educator. Like, where do you get all yours? Like, where does everything come from? Like, just in the way you explained it, in regard from the education, the information standpoint, but then also from, I guess, spiritual aspects or other things. Where does all your sort of knowledge and how you present it come from?
I think it's just a life lived, to be honest. I think everybody has their own life, their own journey, their own point of view. And that's why I think it is so important to like investigate a therapist that you're interested in. And if you don't feel like they hear you or that they're speaking or understand what you're talking about, there is someone out there that will, because life experience is so diverse. It's important to be able to speak your own truth, to use a hackneyed phrase, and to incorporate it with the ideas that you want to impress upon the world, because there will be people that will only hear the way you put it. And then there are other people like Anne Hodder-Shipp and I speak very differently. And she speaks to a particular group that would never, ever hear what I have to say, and vice versa.
Right.
So same with my friend Emily Morse, who has a popular radio show on Sirius Radio, Sex with Emily.
Yeah.
We speak completely different languages when we're teaching, but she speaks to such a huge population that would never hear what I have to say. And it's so important that she exists, because she is able to get in there and speak about sex positivity, right? To people that might never have heard of that before.
Yeah, and I enjoy how she does it. Yeah.
Yeah, and she shows people and models to people that have never had sex education, or maybe have had very little, or have questions that they're afraid to ask anybody. She models to people a shame-free way to look at their lives and to help themselves and to help their partners, and meets them where they are. And so whoever you are learning from in any realm of your life are going to meet you where you are, so that you can understand more about yourself.
I usually wrap things up by asking people from time to time to suggest somebody who might be a good person to have on this podcast.
Yes.
Who would you select?
I think Joellen Noddy would be wonderful. She just wrote a book about sex and depression, and it's something people don't normally talk about. So I think that that's a really important topic that needs to be brought to light. Cool. So I like her.
Cool. Okay, now where can people go online to get more information and follow you and everything?
On social, I'm the Elle Chase. And my website is ellechase.com.
Thank you for listening to the Fresh is the Word podcast, hosted and produced by myself, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier, empowered by Anchor at anchor.fm/Fresh is the Word. Fresh is the Word theme music provided by Steve O. You can find more of his productions at iamsteveo.bandcamp.com, and that's EYEAMSTEVEO.bandcamp.com. Fresh is the Word is available on all major streaming platforms. Please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. If you want to support Fresh is the Word, please consider pledging via Patreon at patreon.com/freshisthe-word. Follow Fresh is the Word on social media, on Twitter at Fresh is the Pod, on Instagram at Fresh is the Word Podcast, and join the Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Fresh is the Word. For more information about Fresh is the Word and our other podcasts, Breaking Records and Renaissance Soul, and a collection of pop culture articles and reviews, please visit freshithepodcast.com. Thank you for listening and your support. Goodbye and good night.
Fresh is the word.